The dead man's feet kept moving. The butcher from Market Street had been dead for over a minute. His heart had stopped, his lungs were still, but his feet hammered out a rhythm against the stone floor. 10 seconds, 30, a full minute. The muscles contracted without a brain, without blood, without will, a body that did not know it was dead. Hans Bach stood over the corpse and wrote in his register, "Muscular contractions continued post-mortem." He underlined it twice, then looked up. Around him, in the half-dark of the hall, 33 people were still dancing. The candles had burned low, wax pooling on stone. The air was thick with a sickly sweetness, sweat, urine, blood, and something else, something Bach had no name for. 2 of those 33 would be dead by morning, but Bach did not know that yet. He knew only the smell, and that his right foot had been twitching in time for half an hour. 3 weeks earlier, Strasbourg had slept in peace. The summons came from Weaver Street on the 14th of July, 1518. The heat had settled over the city for 3 weeks running, heavy, suffocating, rotten. Bach walked fast, a lavender-choked cloth pressed to his face. At the crossroads, a crowd, and at its center, a woman. Frau Trophäa danced, without music, without a partner, without expression. Her eyes were open, her gaze was nowhere. Her feet moved in a steady, precise rhythm, as though she heard a melody no one else could hear. The soles of her feet were ground down to raw flesh. Behind her on the cobblestones, red crescents. 3 hours already. Bach shouted for her to stop. She gave no answer. He seized her shoulder. She tore free without breaking stride. 4 men tried to carry her off. She wrenched loose with such force that 2 of them let go. The diagnosis seemed obvious. Febrile delirium, ergot poisoning. Bach wrote in his register, febrile delirium. He prescribed rest. That was his first decision on this case. Not one of the ones that followed would prove correct. By morning, Trophäa was still dancing. She had not eaten, not drunk, not stopped. Bach tried binding her knees with linen. Her husband stood in the doorway. "She isn't dancing," he said quietly. "Something is dancing her." The bandages tore within the hour. Out on the square, a second person was already moving, Trophäa's neighbor. He had come to watch, and then he had begun. The same rhythm, the same emptiness in his eyes. That was the last morning Bach believed he was dealing with a disease. Councillor Sturzel gave Bach 3 days. By the time he left the town hall, 6 people were dancing. He gathered them in the Weavers' Guild Hall. Stone walls, cold floor, narrow windows behind iron grates. The same smell, sickly sweet, unmistakably human. And beneath it, something else, warm, earthy, as if it rose not from the bodies, but from the stone itself. The 6 moved through the hall. They collided. They fell. They rose. Each had a different pattern, but the tempo was the same. One invisible metronome. As if they all heard a single piece of music that did not exist. Candlelight threw jerking shadows across the walls. Bach sat against the stone and wrote until it grew too dark to see the ink. Wax dripped onto the floor. The shadows twitched. That night, the butcher clutched his chest and fell face first into the stone, and his feet kept going. By morning, the count stood at 34. Bach had not slept in 2 days. His hands trembled when he dipped his quill. Bach went to the bishop. Canon Bertz intercepted him in the anteroom. "This was no disease," Bertz said. "It was the curse of Saint Vitus, punishment for sin. The treatment was pilgrimage. Let them keep moving." "The movement is killing them," Bach said. "To halt divine punishment," Bertz replied, "is a greater sin than the sin for which they are being punished." Within 3 weeks, that logic would kill more people than the illness itself. That night, Bach stayed with the dancers. One woman whispered, "Take the music away." "What music?" She did not answer. Her eyes looked through him toward something Bach could not see. On the steps outside, in the open air, he noticed his right foot twitching. In time. He grabbed his own knee, pressed down with both hands. The foot stopped. He sat like that for 10 minutes. He did not breathe. Then he let go. The foot was still. He blamed exhaustion. By the 20th of July, the number had passed 100. The magistrate reached a decision that made Bach's vision go dark. "Hire musicians. Build a stage in the square. Give the dancers music so that Saint Vitus might be satisfied." Bertz's logic had won. Shaws shouted in the council chamber. Sterzel looked past him. The decision was made. The musicians played. Within the first hour, 20 more joined the dancers from among the spectators. The square became a carnival of madness. Citizens came to watch with horror and hunger both. Children mimicked the dancers. A merchant sold red ribbons against the curse, 4 pfennigs apiece. And Bach counted. Every new case had stood nearest the stage. Every one of them had watched longer than the rest. The disease entered through the eyes of those who watched. He looked up and saw Matthias, his assistant. At the edge of the stage, gaze glassy, right foot beating time. Bach grabbed him and dragged him away. Matthias blinked, came back. He had no memory of the last several minutes. Bach brought the data to Bertz. The canon turned it against him. Those who watch become infected. Disease spreads through the body. Sin spreads through the gaze. Medicine is powerless. Bertz ordered a pilgrimage to the chapel at Hohenstein, 20 kilometers on foot. Bach spent the night before the march with the worst cases. He had not slept in 4 days. His eyes burned. His hands shook. 11 people danced, lying on their backs, feet in the air, worn to the bone. Bach tried administering opium. The bodies did not respond. The muscles contracted as though the signal came from somewhere other than the brain. One of the women turned her head. She looked at him, her gaze clear, calm, lucid. And she said, "You hear it too. Don't lie to yourself." Bach stepped out onto the staircase. He listened. Silence. But inside it, a rhythm, not a sound, a sensation, a pulse, in the walls, in the floor, in the warm night air, the same sickly sweet smell rising from below, from the stone, as though the city itself was sweating. He looked down at his right foot. It was still. He took his hand off his knee. The foot jerked. Once. The same tempo. The procession set out at dawn. Musicians in front, Bertz with a golden cross, and behind them a herd that did not walk but danced. Some broke ahead, leaping on their ruined feet. Others veered into the fields and spun among the wheat. Bach and 4 attendants ran between them, seizing arms, turning bodies, pushing them back onto the road. Dust from hundreds of feet hung in the morning light, a rust-colored cloud. 3 died on the way, 2 men and an old woman who had danced from the first day. They dropped and did not rise. Their legs still twitched as they were dragged to the roadside. One young woman walked off into the wheat field. She turned in circles, wider, wider. They could not catch her. Bach watched for a long time as the dark figure receded across a golden sea toward the horizon. At the chapel, Bertz performed the rite. Prayers, holy water. Red droplets fell on the steps. The dancers stood barefoot, and the stone beneath them darkened. Not one of them stopped. Bertz repeated the prayer, louder. Nothing. For the first time, a crack in his faith. On the road back, they walked side by side. "This is not Saint Vitus," Bertz said quietly. "Then what is it?" Bertz had no answer. Bach looked back. Matthias was walking strangely, not dancing, but his step had a rhythm to it, measured, with a slight sway. Matthias did not notice. Bach said nothing. He was afraid that naming it would make it real. End of July. More than 300 dancing. 14 dead. The city was paralyzed. The market was shut. Shops were boarded. The smell hung over the square. The same one, sickly sweet, impossible. Strasbourg smelled like an open wound. On the stage, the first child, a girl perhaps 8 years old. Bach tore her from her mother's arms, carried her to the infirmary, tied her legs down. Within an hour, the girl lay motionless, but her heart was beating 180 times a minute. Beneath the skin, the muscles contracted invisibly, continuously. Restraining the body from the outside was not enough. In dusty chronicles, Bach found earlier records. Choreomania, 1374, 1416, 1463. Every time, one beginning, one madness, a sudden end with no explanation. Except for one entry, the Chronicle of Liege, 1374. The dance ceased when they removed that which sounded. Not the music, that which sounded. Bach read it 3 times. The chronicler had not explained what he meant. Perhaps he could not. Perhaps he was afraid to. Bach's foot was twitching again. He had not noticed when it started. He pressed it with his hand. No effect. He lifted his hand. The twitching stopped on its own 30 seconds later. He returned to Trophia. She had been dancing for 17 days, wasted to transparency, ribs visible through her shift, but her feet moved with the same precision as before. Bach leaned close. "I hear it too," he said. "A lie, or not entirely." Trophia turned her head. For the first time in 17 days, a conscious gaze. "It's not above, it's under the square. I stepped on it, and it woke up." Strasbourg stands on a Roman foundation. Beneath the town hall square, old cisterns, sealed since the Choreomania of 1416. Bach descended into the basement of the town hall. He placed his palm against the wall. The stone was warm, and it vibrated, the same rhythm he had been tapping with his finger against the table, against the railing, against his thigh. The source was here, and it had been here before Strasbourg. Bertz listened. And what frightened him was not the epidemic, but the explanation. If something lay beneath the square, and it came neither from God nor from the devil, then neither prayer nor science could stop it. Bertz refused. That night, Matthias disappeared. In the morning, they found him in the square. He was dancing. Bach had lost his assistant, his support, and his time, but not his direction. He came to the town hall alone that night, and at the entrance to the cellar stood Bertz. He had come, after all, not to help, to see. They descended together. The torch crackled. The air below was dense, warm, alive. Bach tore at the wall with his bare hands, tearing his nails to the quick. The masonry gave way slowly, stone by stone. His fingers went numb, but he did not stop. When the last block fell free, something exhaled from the breach. The same sickly sweet smell, but now thick, almost tangible, like the breath of something enormous. Dust in the torchlight hung motionless. Then it swayed, left, right, left, in time. Beyond the wall, a chamber, circular, perfect, older than the city itself. The floor was a stone disk scored with concentric rings. The innermost ring had been polished smooth. Thousands of feet had walked the same path. At the center, a depression the size of a human foot. 1 foot, the left. The floor hummed. The sound did not come through the ears. It came through the jaw, through the teeth, through the bones of the skull. Bach felt pressure behind his eyes, dull, steady, pulsing. His eyeballs thrummed in their sockets. When Trophea said, "I stepped on it," she had not been speaking in metaphor. Bertz stepped toward the breach. He saw the chamber, and he dropped to his knees. Not from fear, from recognition. This is older than Christ, older than our faith. His eyes had become like those of the dancers, empty, hungry attention. Bach struck him across the face. Bertz came back. His hands were shaking. He did not argue again. The Chronicle of Liege. They removed that which sounded, bury the chamber, cut off the resonance, but no one could set foot on that floor. A deaf mason had lasted less than an hour. The vibration traveled through stone, through bone. Then they would not go down. They would fill it from above, through the breach. Buckets, ropes, night. Bach stood alone below, at the edge of the breach. Bertz above, gripping the rope, his hands shaking, his lips moving in prayer. For the first time in 3 weeks, Bach was grateful for it. The earth poured in, the level rose, the hum grew. With each bucket, it crawled deeper into his skull. It pressed from inside against his temples, against his eyes, against his teeth. Bach felt something warm trickle from his nose. He wiped it with his finger, held it in the torchlight. Blood. The rope flayed his palms. His hands burned, but he did not stop. He was not filling a pit. He was burying something alive that refused to die. Above, on the square, 400 dancers froze, all of them. For 3 seconds, silence. A silence more terrifying than any scream. And then they drove their feet into the stone, all together, faster, harder. Whatever lay below knew it was being buried, and it began to fight. The last bucket, the breach sealed. Dawn. Buck climbed to the square. The dancers were still moving. It had not worked. He stood with earth under his fingernails and blood on his lips, watching 400 people he had failed to save. His arms hung at his sides. He could not feel his fingers. He blinked, and one woman stopped, young, dress torn. She simply stopped, blinked like someone waking in the middle of a street. Then another, and another. A wave of stillness spreading from the center outward. By noon, 20 were still dancing. By evening, 3. By nightfall, none. Matthias sat on the cobblestones, alive, gaunt, with the eyes of a man who had seen something beyond language. He looked at Bach, did not recognize him. A minute later, he did, but something in his gaze had changed forever. For the rest of his life, he walked with his heels barely touching the ground, as though afraid of waking what lay beneath. The magistrate announced that the epidemic had ended thanks to prayer. Bertz stood beside the counselors and said nothing. Bach stood in the crowd. Bertz caught his eye, the only one who knew. They did not speak, not then, not after. Bach wrote a report, 12 pages in a tight hand. Everything he knew, everything he had seen, everything he had endured over those 3 weeks. He read it through and understood if anyone excavated that chamber, it would all begin again. He stared at the stack of paper for a long time. Then he held the candle to the edge of the first page. The paper caught slowly, with a dry whisper. Wax dripped onto the table, in the same rhythm as everything else in this city. Bach watched his only proof turn to ash. He left 6 words of Latin in the medical register. Causa morbi chorea naturalis, cessavit sponte. Cause of illness, natural dance, ceased spontaneously. A lie in 6 words, the only protection. He left Strasbourg a few months later. He lived quietly. He aged, but one detail would not let go. When the chamber was nearly full, the last thing he heard was not the hum. The rhythm had changed, grown ragged, as though what lay below had stopped vibrating and started pounding. From inside, like a fist against stone, only the fist was the size of the city square. Bach learned not to think about it, almost. But every time he heard a drum in the square, his right foot twitched. For a fraction of a second, one beat, the same tempo. The square still stands. The cellars beneath it remain sealed. No one has ever checked whether it is quiet down there.